my name's Scott, and I've been a counsellor now for over 12 years. In particular, 9 years working at a children's hospice, where one of our roles was to support families after the loss of a child. It was doing that work where I realised that fathers I felt were quite missed in the whole process of providing support after the death of a child. And I really wanted to know more about this, and I wanted to then really do some in-depth research into what the experiences of being a bereaved father was like, but not in any academic way. And I really wanted to hear from the dads' voices themselves. So my whole research was about listening to dads' voices and collating some themes as described by the bereaved fathers themselves. So within the research, there was this common theme that was described by one researcher looking into the experience of bereaved fathers, and this researcher called it the double bind, which essentially means that there was still this traditional view that fathers are the sort of strong ones, that they need to be the ones who are in support. So that's one position of the bind. But because we live in these sort of modern times where the ideal way to express grief is something a bit more vulnerable, a bit more emotional, a bit more open, there was also an expectation on dads that they also needed to be quite open and vulnerable with how they were feeling, hence the double bind, which it feels like a really impossible position. So this expectation then that probably falls on a lot of fathers to be the rock, to be the strong one, is quite a traditional position. And that's okay to some degree, but I think it becomes an issue when that father is then really struggling with their own grief, with their own sense of loss, maybe feeling like they don't have space or the ability to really express how they're feeling, or even what that would look like. You know, how do I start to talk about how I feel? That can be a really tough thing for men to try and attempt, really. I'm saying this as a man. I kind of know what that feels like. So it can become quite unhelpful if in this sort of position as the strong one and the rock really does mean that you are then suffering in silence, or that you feel like you've got no spaces to put yourself and your own needs first. So one of the other themes that came out in the research that the bereaved fathers were describing themselves was this place that they would process their own grief, and they would describe it as in isolation. It was off on their own, really, in isolation. Some of the dads would talk about the only time they ever cried was on their own, was in an isolated place. There's no judgment about that. That's okay in one sense. I think where it becomes a problem is when that build-up of grief, or that build-up of huge vulnerability, huge feeling, doesn't have any other place to go, and that can have some real consequences to mental health, to sort of comorbidities, to suicide rates and things like that. So it's not that grieving on your own isn't okay, because there's sometimes we just need that space. It's if that's going on for a prolonged time, and if that's having real impact on that father in particular. If people are not talking in their families, it might be wives, husbands, partners, other children. I think that can have a real impact too. And it's not that you have to talk for somebody else. It's just that I think open communication has been shown that if there's a safe space to do that, it can have some real benefits. And I would say we need to be looking out for our dads and our fathers, whether that's as partners or as friends. What's the harm of just checking in and making sure that they're okay? They may not respond. And again, this isn't about a list of do's and don'ts. They may not respond. But I think this is what I'm trying to get across today. It's when we don't attempt to reach out, I think that's where real damage can be done. And so another part of the work that I did in my research was a theme that came out was what the fathers did after the death of their child, and something came out quite strongly, and it was this kind of need to kind of have some distraction, was perhaps going back to work, kind of immersing in hobbies, going for walk. And again, the rhetoric out there can be that, you know, you're not supposed to have distraction when you're grieving. You're supposed to focus intently just on grieving. I think that's a misunderstanding, and I think that there can be an oscillation between when we are consumed in our grief, but when also we might have more space around us to do some of the things we want to do. So it's not that distraction is bad and just solely focused on grief is good. Two things can be true at once. Again, it's about engaging fathers and hearing what they need, because it might be that going back to work, it might be too early. So it's about a dialogue, it's about communication. And again, it's not about do this, don't do that. It's about when something doesn't become supportive or feel like it's having any benefit to you, that's when we should be concerned and reaching out and checking in and making sure things are okay. So I guess we might be left with the question of how do we invite bereaved fathers into spaces that might offer some support. It might be counselling. I'm not saying that's the only thing. I'm a counsellor, so of course I would say that, but I know that isn't the only space that might be on offer. And I think there is a real barrier for men to access help, especially when it comes to mental health, especially when it comes to really vulnerable feelings. And I think it's about having a really supportive framework at home, where we're not compounding those societal expectations about what we expect from our dads and our men. And then I think it's about finding that right support for you. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one counselling situation. I don't think that always works for men. It might be that you have a particular person you know you can open up to. It might be that finding some groups or some peer support with other bereaved dads. You know, I've facilitated bereaved parents groups before in the past, and some of the dads have told me that they would never ever go to counselling, but they would go to a group where they knew that other parents, other dads were having similar feelings, like that shared experience that felt a lot safer. There's an idea that sometimes talking face to face is tricky. So some people have described to me that talking side to side is a lot easier. So even the way that you might have a conversation, it might be opening up to a friend, just taking a risk to open up to a trusted friend. It doesn't have to look one particular way. And I've seen many different ways that dads connect with other dads, bereaved dads connect with other bereaved dads. And there's many groups. There's groups that will go on kind of like these really long walks together, these kind of walks to raise money, to raise awareness. There's groups that go and play sport together. There's groups that will go and have a kind of, bacon butty in the morning together, or go for a cycle or a swim or something like that. Make it your own. Whatever your interests might be. I think that's the thing I'm really trying to express today, is that it doesn't have to look one particular way. As long as you feel like you're being heard, and as long as you feel like you're in a community that feels safe, where you can maybe talk about these things, express these things, or just go and listen. You don't even have to talk. Another really key and powerful part of the research that came out, and this is what I found really moving actually, and that is about this need to keep the child's memory present. A continuing bond is the sort of technical term, but in terms of creating ways of ritual or remembrance, just it feels so essential. And the fathers were really talking about the ways that they would do that to honour the memory of their child, and that isn't in a way of it's about moving on from that. It's almost like this continuing presence. People would do things on the anniversary every year, or people would do things every day, or the fathers would find these really deep, meaningful, deeply personal, meaningful ways that would be having a a moment with that child once again. And I found that a really powerful thing. And again, I'm thinking about that really has to be held in that dad's community or family, really non-judgmentally, having no judgment about what those particular ways to create remembrance are. And again, to even, if it's okay with the father themselves to engage in that, to ask about that, it's such a vital thing for dads to be able to do. One of the more, I think, possibly distressing parts that has come out in this research, but also again in bereaved fathers that I've spoken to, has been a monumental shift in perspective after the loss of a child. And that's looked and taken many different forms. It can be that the job that somebody's done for many, many decades no longer is important. Somebody's values might have shifted in terms of the things that felt important before now feel totally different. And that's a huge change, and that can almost feel a little bit like a secondary loss, which is these things that we've lived by for so many years now don't have the meaning that they did. And what I would really want to say is that that is okay, and that is a very normal part of deep loss. And if there's any kind of hope in that, it might mean that the next chapter of that person's life might be searching for something that is really, really internally important to that person. I've seen fathers that have made decisions in the next phase of their life that has meant so much more to them because it's felt like they are following something that they have always maybe wanted to do or wanted to explore. And this perspective change has really maybe been one of the things that's been the first step on that new journey for them. So I ended my research, and whenever I contribute to supporting bereaved dads, I often end on this quote that came from a bereaved father who contributed to a lot of the writing. And this father says that if I was to support any dad, I would tell them to let all the emotions out. I would tell them to grieve exactly how they felt they needed to at the time, and to let nobody put any expectation on their grief, that whatever they are doing and how they're expressing it is absolutely okay for them. So what I think has come out of the work that I've done and the research that I've tried to do in terms of what's been most helpful, it is really about listening to what the dads may want or need. And I know that can be a really confusing thing, because you may be out there saying, I don't really know what I want or need, and that is okay. So there is something about giving bereaved fathers time and space to maybe understand exactly what's going on for them. There may be some development of what a bereaved father might need at a certain point. And one of the conversations I once had with a dad who said one of the reasons why he didn't access support was because nobody asked him what he wanted or needed. And it was just so stark to me that was one of the big barriers for this particular father, was that nobody asked him. Nobody asked him how he was. Nobody asked him what he needed. So I think there is this process that we all need to be a lot more open to, which is even if there isn't a definite answer, that's okay. But just asking, just checking in, and just seeing what a father might need.